Hello and welcome to Take the Lead Presents Virtual Happy Hour. We're glad you're here. I'm Gloria Felt, co-founder and president of Take the Lead. We host virtual happy hours on the second Wednesday of each month at 6:30 p.m. Eastern Time. We interview women who take the lead in their own lives and careers. So you have 1 hour once a month to boost your career. It's a quick, easy, and fun way to learn what other smart, interesting role model women are up to too. Please tweet your questions to @TakeLeadWomen or type them into the chat box. We want to hear from you and we'll get those questions answered. Take the Lead's mission is nothing less than leadership gender parity by 2025. Visit www.taketheleadwomen.com to find training programs for yourself and your organization. You can also find mentoring, coaching, role model events, and great content to help you on your journey. That's www.taketheleadwomen.com. Now, make yourself comfortable. Grab a cocktail, a mocktail, tea, coffee, glass of water, whatever you like, and sit back for an inspiring virtual happy hour. A powerful welcome to you. I'm Gloria Felt, co-founder and president of Take the Lead. And you know, June brings us Father's Day. So I want to start by wishing any fathers who may be with us tonight, or today, or whatever time it is may be for you, a happy Father's Day. And June is also LGBTQ Pride Month. So this virtual happy hour is all about pride in the workplace. Why building LGBTQ inclusion culture is critical. We'll look at best practices for inclusion, creating cultures of true equity. And you know, the mission of Take the Lead is to reach gender parity in leadership positions across all sectors by 2025. And diversity and inclusion within our mission are absolutely essential. We all succeed or none of us succeed. So be sure and stay till the end of the conversation so you can get some really fabulous tips and free goodies that we have for you. Business Solvers 2019 State of the Workplace Empathy Executive Summary and Insights ebook for one thing. I believe we're going to have some great tips from GLAAD about GLBTQ inclusion. And one lucky person is going to win a delicious gift package of Lemonette dressings. I'm so excited about that. I wish I could actually be eligible to win. I'm going to have to go buy some right away because we have a thing about lemons in our family. We have this thing about lemons, and I'm pleased, by the way, to be joined by the fabulous co-host, Reshma Gopaldas, Vice President for Video at She Media. Hey, Reshma. So my mother used to have this giant lemon tree on her patio. It was like all concrete, except there was one little space where this one huge lemon tree grew out of it, and it grew the most fabulous, beautiful lemons. And the story is that my son one year was helping her pick lemons, and he just had to get that perfect huge lemon at the very top of the tree. So he had one thing, a chair on top of something else, on top of something else. And he got the lemon, but he fell and broke his wrist at the same time. So I think there is some kind of a myth or legend that's kind of like that, some moral to this story, but this has nothing to do with anything we're about to talk about, but I just had to reveal my affinity for lemons. So I'm looking forward to learning more about Lemonette. So Reshma, I think the good news is we've made tremendous progress for LGBTQ rights, from virtually no basic rights not that long ago to Supreme Court decisions that affirm the right to same-sex marriage. But as we have seen, and as you well know from the work you've done over the years, with women's rights and civil rights in general, you can change laws, but that doesn't necessarily change minds or behaviors. So let's talk about how that plays out at work and what we can do to build inclusive workplaces. And would you be so kind as to introduce our amazing?
Sure. All right. Hi, everyone. So tonight we have two amazing guests. I'm going to start with Jehan Agrama. She is the CEO of Lemonette, which is right behind her there. And Lemonette is the first, tell me if I'm getting this right, first ever exclusively lemon-based dressing line, and it's now available in 150 stores. and tonight. And she's also the president of Harmony Gold. It's a film production company. And she was a co-founding member of GLAAD, which, as many of you probably know, is the Gay and Lesbian Alliance Against Defamation. So, Jehan, we like to ask one question to all of our guests to kick it off. And the question is, how did you get to be you?
Couldn't have sent that to me before so I could have prepared.
No, we want the spontaneous you.
So how did I get to be me?
Yeah.
I think being born in Egypt, living in Lebanon and Rome, being educated in the US and then naturalized here, being a woman, an immigrant, a lesbian, a Muslim, that's part of it.
Amazing. And how did you get into Lemonette and become the president of your film company?
Well, it's a family-run business, so nepotism is a closely held belief here. But I did leave the company about 30 years ago and started working with GLAAD and was a co-founder. And I've only recently come back to the company. And then even more recently, working with my 89-year-old father, he was eating salad every day for lunch and was using this product, Lemonette. And when I was talking to him about products and the need for sales and marketing, he said, well, this is a great product. Let's sell this product. And I'm, it's not film, it's salad dressing. But that's my father. He's an entrepreneur. So he contacted Tenny Avanesian, who is the woman that founded the company 4 years ago and single-handedly brought it to over 120 stores across California and Arizona. Wow. So when we met her, all I could think of is this one person, no help, no employees, did this on her own, and her background is not even in this industry. It's in mathematics and law. I figured, if we joined forces, we could probably do a lot. So, I mean, it's an incredible story. I've only been active with her for 4 months, but it feels like we hit it off, and it feels like another family has started. So it's an exciting, just when I thought I would be, slowing down a little, here we are launching not a new brand, but a new iteration of that brand. So it's very exciting, and it's a whole new world, as they say.
Well, I can totally relate to that, having sort of failed retirement myself at least once, and ended up starting Take the Lead. So it's so interesting because every decade brings something new, some new opportunity. And so let me introduce our second guest tonight, Natalie Jane Egan, CEO and founder of Translator. And she is a B2B software entrepreneur. I think we're kind of in entrepreneur heaven tonight. And I think we can learn a lot about not only the topic of the evening, but also about entrepreneurship. And I wonder if there's a connection between the story that you've had, the path that you've walked, and your willingness and ability to take on that kind of risk that entrepreneurs have to do. Natalie, would you please share with us, how did you get to be you? What has been your path?
Wow, so I was glad to have like a couple minutes of heads up while, so I could process that. But I don't think that this happy hour is long enough. I think we need a couple weeks at least to really kind of figure out how I got here. But it's been a pretty amazing journey and a pretty crazy story that I'll try and condense here. But just first and foremost, to everyone that's online, just to introduce myself and to say my pronouns. My pronouns are she, her, and hers. My name is Natalie Egan. I'm the CEO of a company called Translator, and we build diversity and inclusion software for corporations, schools, and nonprofits. And I've always been sort of a serial entrepreneur. I've been starting businesses, trying to solve problems and help people and kind of make money along the way since I was about 5 years old. The joke is that I've started over 200 businesses. Just most of them didn't have any customers at all. In fact, you know, many had 0 customers. I'm sort of a fail fast kind of girl. But Translator is my second major sort of tech startup. My previous company I founded in my previous identity before I transitioned. I am a transgender woman is how I identify. And you know, I lived my life in a bubble of white male privilege with access and resources, and I never had to think about my identity. You know, identified as cisgender, heteronormative bro. You know, I sort of lived bro culture. If you've heard the term brotopia, like that was really our employer brand at my previous company. So it was a very intentional strategy that we didn't realize how toxic and bad it really was, but at the time it felt right, and ultimately it really contributed to the downfall of that company. And sort of after that company, you know, it did the rise and fall. After it fell, when my life sort of hit the you know, the bottom of the barrel, and unfortunately my marriage fell apart. That's when I figured out my identity. That's when I sort of finally you know, figured out my truth, and that I was in fact transgender, and I had been repressing it my whole life. And you know, there's a long story to it all. I actually, unfortunately, almost took my own life. I didn't think anyone would accept me for me, and fortunately, someone came into my life and gave me the courage and the hope and strength to just at least try to be myself. So about 3.5 years ago, I started this journey to becoming Natalie, which I oftentimes also refer to as my journey to empathy. And that's sort of one of the biggest surprises, is that you know, in retrospect, I think I realized that I had been confusing the word sympathy with empathy my whole life. You know, I never had to think about my identity, and all of a sudden, you know, I'm sort of this overnight minority, you know, heavily marginalized, you know, and very misunderstood in a lot of ways. And so that got me really woke, of course, or at least started the process of waking up. And through that, I always tell people I basically experienced bias, discrimination, and hatred for the first time in my life about 3.5 years ago. And I put a stake in the ground saying, you know, I'm going to do something about this. I'm going to build technology to help solve this problem of inequality, but also to make sure that people, you know, don't have to suffer the way that I did for whatever reason of their experience or their privilege. And so it's been crazy getting here, but we launched this company about 3 years ago. We're still early days, but we've got great traction, and I'm super excited to be part of this conversation today. So thank you for having me.
Could I ask you to say a little more about what you've observed about the difference between sympathy and empathy? That really piqued my interest.
Yeah, so I mean, I really, as much as some people on the line may think that that's pathetic, I'm just telling you the truth. I mean, my whole life, I just sort of used the words interchangeably. I was sort of programmed to say them and when to say them, but I didn't know the difference. I think the simplest way to kind of, for me to explain it at this point, is that sympathy is feeling bad for somebody, and empathy is the ability to kind of feel what they feel, to walk in their shoes. And I think that the secret to empathy is storytelling. And so that's kind of why I'm so excited to be on this call today and share my story and create representation for the trans community, and help, help us all hear and share stories.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much for doing it.
What I find very disheartening is the fact that we were doing this kind of work. And I really want to know more, Natalie, in a second about Translator and how it actually works. But we were doing sensitivity training, sexual orientation in the workplace trainings 30 years ago, AIDS in the workplace training. And it's just disheartening that as much as we move forward, we still have people having to go through what Natalie went through a few years ago in dealing with discrimination, alienation, so much so that she didn't come out of the closet, as it were. She couldn't accept her life. And it's disheartening to have to, we thought we had made many strides, and even with all the strides we have made, hundreds of characters and images of lesbian, gay, queer, T people in the media, it's still an issue, and it still has to be dealt with.
So I want to turn this back to Reshma in just a second, but I just want to let you all know something. And first of all, let me remind those people who have tuned in to please go ahead and tweet your questions to @TakeLeadWomen, @TakeLeadWomen, or put them in the chat box, because we really want to hear from you. And these experts are at the ready to answer your questions. As you can already see, they're very intent on sharing their stories and their perceptions and helping in any way they can. But what I want you two to know, Natalie and Jehan, is that my team just said we're getting lots of comments of love and support.
Great.
So I just wanted to start with that and let you know that. If you can see my texts here are lining up. We have lots of questions coming from viewers, but Reshma, why don't you move on, and then we'll come to these questions in just a sec.
Great.
So, Jehan, as you were just saying, June is Pride Month, so it's a really good time to take a look at the evolution of workplace cultures. While the New York City Police Commissioner recently issued an apology 50 years after the raid prompting the riots at Stonewall Inn in New York, inclusion and fairness for LGBTQ communities and persons is still not fully realized. Very quickly, a 2017 survey conducted found more than 1 in 5 LGBTQ people have experienced institutional discrimination when applying for jobs, negotiating pay, or being considered promoted. Jehan, have you dealt with workplace discrimination, and how do you advise others to challenge it?
Well, being a family-owned business, I discriminate against mine as often as possible. But no, not personally, thankfully. However, it is an issue. I mean, it's also interesting. There was another study done by the Human Rights, not Human Rights, HRC. And they were talking about the Fortune 500 companies and where they stood, their report card on gay and lesbian issues. And they were touting that, 100%, so many reached 100% level. But when you really look at the numbers, unless I've read them totally wrong, yes, they might have a non-discrimination policy. Yes, they might, have lesbian and gay and queer support groups. However, only 49% offered same-sex health benefits. So for me, there's a lot of talk about acceptance, talk about, yes, maybe they're just happy to give us our little club, but how is the systemic change happening? And, you don't really need to talk about the gay and lesbian community. You can just keep a blank and input woman, Black, brown. I mean, it's a whole paradigm shift that needs to take place. We tried to do it with GLAAD. We achieved great things, but it's not over. It's far from even beginning. I mean, that's what I think. They can give a lot of lip service. Look, some companies are phenomenal. Ben and Jerry's. But you have to look at the core values of a company to see if, in fact, they are in line with what they advertise.
Right. I think, all of this is, I do a lot of work now on the effects of implicit bias and explicit bias on our own heads. I think, because we all grew up in the same culture, and it's really hard to change a culture while you're living in it. It's really hard. It's a very long game. And we all need, those of us who are trying to make that change need a lot of support along the way.
What's interesting is even with the youth today is so different. and so much more liberated, I think. Or maybe our ancestors said that about us. But when I look at the fluidity and the fact that, you know, it was used to just be lesbian and gay. Nobody wanted to touch bisexual even, forget transgender. And now it's gender non-binary. There's a fluidity with the new generation, at least in this movement, that is hopeful.
Right. Well, so there's a question from Nora that I want to take, which is, it's interesting how the world seems to be in a spasm around trans people. We thought we had moved forward, then snapped back. How does Natalie handle those fluctuations?
Great question. So I think you're right. The world is freaking out right now, and it's sort of it's an interesting time. You know, trans people have been around since the beginning of time. We were just hiding, and we didn't have any ability to communicate with ourselves, and therefore the world kind of didn't know that we existed. So we were kind of hiding and afraid. And my whole life, since I was 5 years old, I didn't know what it was. I knew I was different, but I had no language for it. Right? There was no representation. There was no one that looked like I want, you know, who I would be, and so, you know, therefore there was kind of no hope. And all of a sudden, in the last couple of years, I mean, people ask me all the time, they're like, "What's going on? Like, why is everybody coming out as trans? Like my nephew and my coworker and, you know, my parents or my friends. I mean, it's crazy, right? Or it seems that way. And the reality is, you know, if people ask me why is this happening, and I say it's the internet. It's the internet again, right? The internet is changing everything again. This time it's changing gender. And the reality is it's just connecting us, right? So we're no longer alone. We're no longer realizing that I'm not the only one, and there is people out there that feel like me, and that's very empowering. So we're connecting to each other. But at the same time, by default, that's connecting us to the world, right? You can't really hide anymore. So, you know, back, you know, even, you know, not even that long ago, 5, 10 years ago, when people transitioned, they would literally disappear. The old identity would go away, and they'd move to another town and start a new job in a new place. And now people are transitioning like almost like in real time in front of us. And it's a very different experience. And it's exciting on one hand, but it's like sort of the double-edged sword of visibility can be very nasty. And, you know, to answer the question sort of directly, like, how do I deal with it? I have to budget for it. Like, I literally every single day kind of just know that I'm probably going to hit 2 to 3 obstacles that I wouldn't have normally bumped into as a white, cisgender, heteronormative dude, you know, that doesn't have to think about their identity. And so, you know, I think we've all done that budgeting in our lives, depending on our identities. But I think, you know, for some of us, it's just been more normalized. And for me, I mean, it's, you know, I come into work and, you know, the elevator repairman has a problem with my identity, like in my building, right? And it's like, that's so distracting for me as I come to work to find that out. And I don't even know who they are, right? It's just this like invisible elevator repair person that I've been told has a problem with me. And so, you know, it's sort of this like, you know, I got to keep my radar on because I can't walk through life the way I used to. So, you know, on one hand, it's very challenging, but you develop the skill sets to deal with it, and you know, the kind of the tools and tricks that we need. I mean, people for years have been saying, you know, you have to stay away from police and you can't walk outside at night by yourself. And so I've had to learn all those things, kind of drinking from the fire hose, which has been crazy. But I feel like the media today, in particular, the social media, is creating these like fires, right? It's just like, it's these flare-ups, especially around trans sports, trans healthcare, you know, trans kids in schools. And it just creates these explosions of misunderstanding and misinformation and emotion. And, you know, I have sympathy, unfortunately, I have empathy. I'm sorry, it's not even sympathy. I but I have empathy for why people feel the way they do. I was trained and programmed to dislike, I would say, hate trans people and LGBT people and anyone that's really different from me. Like, I was taught that from growing up. So when other people treat me that way, unfortunately, you know, this is where I was saying, I mean, I kind of feel bad for them, right? I know why they feel that way, but at the same time, I have empathy, right? So it's like, I can feel why they feel that way, and it empowers me to build solutions to help, you know, unlearn what we've learned. And so, you know, it kind of all comes back to that.
Yeah.
Right.
Speaking of unlearning what we've learned, earlier we were talking about how important language is. So as you were talking, I just started to think about the word heteronormative. Does that bother you? Because it bothers me. Like, to have the word normative attached to hetero, do you think that will ever change? And can you speak a little bit more about language and how important it is?
Yeah, so I think language is very important. It's critical. Everything happens through language. Like, there's no experience that we have without language. And, you know, I apologize if that word was triggering for you. I've never gotten that feedback on it. But I'm using it to describe a modality of what people think is commercially, like the way that they expect it to be. So it's really not it's not like a goal as much as it is like a state that I'm describing that people default to. And, you know, if it's outside of that, then it feels uncomfortable. It's not normal.
Yeah.
But I totally.
I wasn't saying I was personally offended by it, but I just was saying, like, having a word like that and attaching the word normal to it sets a standard that I think creates more problems.
Yeah, but it is the reality. On the other hand, you have a language that we're all used to using, and it's already built in. It does take a lot of work to get out of it. I mean, people are giving other people flack for using, you know, the gender, how you want to be called. A lot of people are like, what's that all about?
Right.
If we're going to change it, it's going to take time, but language is powerful and language is defining. And unless you reclaim the language and use it, I mean, we had avowed homosexual not too long ago instead of openly gay.
Yeah.
That's just one
example. I actually even find the openly adjective to be annoying to me. It's like, well, what do you mean openly? I mean, you know, either you are or you aren't.
Well, to be honest, there was a difference because there were much more people in the closet. So if they wanted to say they couldn't call somebody gay unless they were openly gay. Otherwise, you were outing them. So, I mean, it's evolved over time. It wasn't openly gay from the get-go, but how do you differentiate between the politician in the closet and the activist on the street? Also, when we would talk about people, we had to say that they were openly gay and that we weren't outing them.
That's a really helpful point. And I want to, Jehan, there's a question here for you specifically that it really relates, because I think media is such an incredibly important part of that discussion about how we define ourselves and how we see ourselves. It tells us how we think about ourselves very often.
Exactly.
So putting on your GLAAD hat for just a moment here, how would you score the media? This is the question to you from Anne. How would you score the media industry right now? Where is there space for improvement around LGBTQ representation?
There's always room for improvement. I know that GLAAD does a report card every year. And just to give you a sense, we were fighting to keep 3 to 4 characters, not even lead characters, just recurring characters on television 30 years ago. And now you have hundreds of gay and lesbian and trans now, and bi and queer and non-defined characters on TV. I mean, 800 and some, or close to 1,000 in 1 year. So you're talking about 4 that we were holding on to for dear life, and then all of a sudden. So yes, it has changed, it has evolved. I think the trans community is going through the same education process that we had to go through as gays and lesbians. Very early on at GLAAD, there was the discussion of adding bisexual and transgender to our mission statement. And while everybody at the time, and this was right when we were becoming a national organization, and at the time, everybody thought it would be too confusing to, obviously we had everybody represented on the board, but in dealing with the media and dealing with education, the message has to be very clear and very simple. And even I've had relationships with men in the past. I've been happily married to a woman for 38 years. So not to call myself lesbian is a little silly. However, it was politically strategic for me to call myself a lesbian to make the point. It gets a little, it's different. So that's, and slowly, as we evolved at GLAAD, we actually made a media guide that was for the media on how to talk about transgender issues. Because the media, yes, we can talk about misinformation, and starting with AIDS, how there was misinformation and vilification. But the point is, a lot of them had no idea how to handle this new information. Just like with transgender, a lot of people have no clue how to handle it properly. So GLAAD came out with a guide for the media saying, this is the correct terminology, and I'm sure it's evolved. I'm talking, you know, we did that in 95, 98. So I'm talking a long period of time ago. So I'm sure it's evolved since then. But it's an education process. And I think that the problem is that we seem as a movement to take many steps forward, but then we have an election where the radical right gets the chief in power, and everything is turned back. Not just gay and lesbian issues, any kind of civil rights you want to talk about. Let's not talk about women. Let's not talk about immigrants. Let's not talk about any of that. So if you're looking at what's happened in this country and the world, I must say, because there's been a right-wing wave across the world, it's terrifying. And it shows you how quickly we can lose our rights and how quickly we can go backwards thinking that we had something there. But right. Education is really the key. And I'm very interested in what Natalie's doing. And actually, I'm fascinated by how it works, because when we would go in the workplace, we would stand up and we would make the people go through exercises and, you know, talk to them about issues. But this is using, I understand, virtual reality to change somebody's perception or to make somebody understand what it's like to be discriminated against. And it's fascinating to use the technology to our benefit.
So we have these steps forward and steps back, and I think every social movement absolutely experiences that, in part because the next wave, the next generation, sometimes doesn't know. It's hard to, you start from where you start in this world, and you just don't always even understand what those struggles have been. Natalie, I want to get back to you on some of those questions, but if I may, we're at the midpoint of the program, and it's when I have the opportunity to remind people of who our amazing guests are. You're at Take the Lead's virtual happy hour featuring Jehan Agrama, President and CEO of Harmony Gold and Lemonette, and Natalie Egan, CEO and founder of Translator and a serial entrepreneur, as she has said. And tonight we have some free resources for you if you're interested in this conversation, you want to keep learning about it, you want to keep doing better and helping your own workplace to do a better job of it. Please be sure you stay until the end, and we will provide you with links to several different resources. There are some great reports for you to download from GLAAD. One is called Accelerating Acceptance. One is called More Than a Number, Shifting the Media Narrative on Transgender Homicides, a guide for journalists and advocates. And also 2018 report on where we are on TV, which is analyzing diversity in primetime scripted series. Woo, a lot of great resources from GLAAD. So you'll be able to download those. Business Solver is also offering its 2019 State of the Workplace Empathy Executive Summary and Insights ebook. And Jehan has graciously offered a gift package of Lemonette dressings to a lucky participant this evening. So we're, oh, looky there, look, see there, show and tell. We will be drawing that name later in the virtual happy hour, so stay tuned. And if that's not enough, in the meanwhile, I want to direct you to Lemonette, where you can download recipes. Oh my God, watermelon mint feta salad. That is like one of my favorite things in the whole world. I love it. I'm gonna have to get that. Anyway, we'll give you all of those links. So meanwhile, don't forget to hop on over to taketheleadwomen.com. That's our website, taketheleadwomen.com. Today and every day for free resources and access to all of the women's leadership programs that will help you break through barriers to get the career of your highest intentions, and we can help your organization reach its diversity and inclusion goals as well. One of our signature programs is called 50 Women Can Change the World, and we do that by different sectors. It's an immersive program over several months of in-person and coaching and online work that we do. We will be launching 50 Women Can Change the World in Healthcare in Phoenix later this year, and 50 Women Can Change the World in Finance in New York. So if you're interested in participating, or you know somebody who'd be a great candidate, go to taketheleadwomen.com and click on the 50 Women programs, and it will take you to where you can either nominate somebody or you can apply yourself for one of these programs. I guarantee you the things we what we most often hear from people who have taken those programs is it was life-changing in a very good way. So we're really excited about continuing to do those. We need companies committed to gender equality to sponsor these programs too. So let me just be straightforward about that. Please, if you're interested in sponsoring or you want to talk with us more about it, just feel free to email me at takethelead@taketheleadwomen.com or tweet me at Gloria Felt. And we'd be happy to talk with you about the benefits that you can get from aligning with Take the Lead and becoming more inclusive in your culture. Woo, okay, sorry, that's my paid political announcement that I have to do at the middle of every program. So thank you for being so kind. And I have more questions. May I ask another question here, Reshma, and then we'll toss it back to you? Okay, from Angelie, benefits programs and some policies were mentioned, but what are some structural changes that you both would like to see companies make or new companies start with? So let's fantasize for a moment. We're starting a company from brand new. So what are some structural changes that you would want companies to make or start with rather? What from a structural sense would you want to do? Natalie, I'm going to assume that you've thought about that and you've done it in your own company. So would you like to start?
Sure. Yeah, of course. I didn't get I know we're trying to cover so much here, but the topic earlier about language in particular, I do identify as openly transgender. I put that out there as a indicator to tell people that I can be a resource. I'm open about it. I am an activist as sort of in that category. And then there's people that are not open, right? They're not, they don't want it to be part of their identity. They are trans, but they don't, it's not, you know, to me, it's sort of like, I'm proud, like you might as well substitute the word proudly, right? I'm proudly transgender. And I don't think that other people aren't proud of it. I just think that like, it's an indicator to people that look, I'm here to create representation. It's very different than just sort of being quiet about it. So in terms of like my wish list, and it's interesting that you started off, because I was immediately thinking about, you know, very large institutions, but the structural changes that I think, you know, one of the things I love to say to people, and if you've got a startup, you know, people oftentimes, you know, the CEO or the founder has to do everything. And they oftentimes will come to us and say, when do we have to start to worry about diversity, right? And when is that tipping point? And they think that there's some sort of trigger that's like, okay, when you reach this number of employees, you need to hire somebody to be in charge of it. And so what I've started telling people is like, you know, I'm the chief diversity officer, right? So like as the CEO, like not only oftentimes the head of sales and the VP of marketing, But in this case, I think, that idea of becoming the chief diversity officer is kind of step one if you're starting your company, right? So thinking about processes from the get-go and really, looking at, because startups in particular are very resource constrained. So oftentimes we do the easy thing. We hire people that are, from our network or people that we know, and typically that they kind of look like us, right? So by default, we're not getting diversity right out of the gate. So I think running, very structured recruiting processes from day one to make sure that you're looking at a diverse candidate pool of people that are, really accretive to your organization is important. And one of the little tips that I use to tell people to do that is to stop looking for cultural fit, because that's sort of a way of saying they need to look and feel and fit in with us. So that's the wrong lens. So if you come out of a meeting and say, they're not really a cultural fit, I would ask you to ask yourself, is that your unconscious bias that's triggering that? Because if you replace it with culture add, like, do they add to the culture? Are they accretive? Like, is it, so instead of saying culture, is Sarah or John or whoever it is a culture fit, or are they culture add, right? So they adding to the diversity, they bringing new diverse perspectives to the table. Like, it's little simple things like that structurally will make difference over time. For larger organizations, it's about, awareness, it's about education, it's about starting the conversation, it's about representation, it's about not being perfect. Too many companies just don't do anything at all because they're like, we have to do it when we do it. It's got to be perfect. But the reality is, if they just look in the mirror, it's a mess today, right? So it's just a mess. And so, what people have to do is sort of roll up their sleeves and say, and oftentimes be, very transparent about where they are in their journey, right? And say, look, we know that we're not perfect, and we're going to start to try to do things to improve this. And, we need your help. And I think people would rather buy into that message than this message that like everything's okay. And we check the box because we sponsored Pride Month. And, we had cupcakes and whatever. I mean, it's like people don't buy that stuff anymore. And so what they really want to see is action. And there's a lot of ways that we can go into action. And it starts off with education, starts off with language. It starts off with representation. I mentioned this earlier, and I'll be brief on it. But like, one of the things that we talk about is that language really matters. And especially in large organizations, there's this like hyper focus on recruiting, in particular. I think it's because it's like the new, shiny object, but everybody's worried about, gendered language in the job requisitions themselves, right? So language that says things, like, you're a rock star, and like all these things that are, typically sort of more masculine. So everybody's freaking out about that, but then we give everybody else a pass internally with their language. So it's so curious to me that these organizations are, so focused on the top end of the recruiting funnel, but then the CEO can stand up in front of the entire company and say, hey guys, we had a great quarter, we're hanging with the big boys, and start, say all this gendered language, and nobody says anything. So it's a really big disconnect between those two sort of ends of the spectrum, and it really requires a systematic overhaul. It's not a simple thing to solve for. It's a systems problem, and you really need it. It needs to be strategic. It can't be just one person and they're, it's everyone's job. It's a layer on top of the company. So
I also think that if companies and organizations do not become diverse, they're really not going to succeed. When you look at the demographics in terms of who is coming to this country, who is living in this country, the number of women that are joining the workforce, the number of women graduating from college versus men, for example. There is a strategic imperative for an organization to have a diverse employee base. That might not be what everybody wants to hear, but eventually that's what it is going to be. I mean, I live in Los Angeles, and it is not a white city. I mean, you might think it's a white city, but we're not a majority. And so what, you're going to import, for example, white people to do the work? So it's a very cynical stance I'm taking, I know, when I'm talking about them having to do it. But also when we look at, I was just thinking of the title of this panel, which is how, you know, the importance of cultivating gay and lesbian people, I think, in the workplace. I think that's what it was. And I think I said this earlier, it could be cultivating women, cultivating Black people, brown people. We really have to change the way we talk about this issue, and we have to just own it. We should be talking about how we have to work across movements together. Because as long as we keep talking about ourselves as an other than, and how can we add them, it's sort of like saying, what is the benefit to adding people to your employee base? I mean, any one of these adjectives, and it's a very limited way of looking at the world or at the company. Again, I think it's going to happen over time. I think we're finding a huge backlash now politically because those that have been in power, whether it's the patriarchy, white men, you name it, are feeling the change. And this is the backlash, and we're feeling it. It's not just economy, it's fear. It's fear of the unknown, it's fear of the person that's other than. And it's just not happening here, it's happening all over the world. And hopefully the pendulum will swing back to a more accepting, healthy norm.
Yeah. So we actually have a lot of questions coming in, so I kind of want to like power through so we can like get to them. There's one that said, how can allies be better allies? Some folks think just marching is enough, but how can we be better allies to LGBTQ entrepreneurs and founders? And then she clarified and said, especially during Pride Month, to founders, entrepreneurs behind brands and companies. And Natalie, I'm going to throw this one to you because you mentioned you need to do more than just cupcakes and this and that. So how can people be better allies?
Yeah, so great question. I mean, I think, you know, in particular, I think we, you know, all marginalized identities need allies in different forms and shapes. And, you know, my experience, I think, is particularly angled around the transgender experience, so I'll speak to that. But I think at a high level, I always tell people, like, whenever I'm like speaking in front of an audience of people, this sort of joke is like, if I asked everybody, you know, if you're an ally, raise your hand, like everyone would raise their hand, right? No one would not raise their hand. But I always tell people, like, look, you know, there's a big difference between like being an ally and being a fan, right? Like just being like, or not being racist doesn't make you an ally. And I think that a lot of times people don't realize that allyship is really an active, you know, engagement. It requires having your radar on and being aware of, you know, and having self-awareness first, which I think is really, really key. But in particular for the trans community, you know, we need help. We need like, and I don't mean charity, but like we literally need help to just have a seat at the table and to get, you know, the same types of resources and access to opportunities that everyone else sort of gets, or, you know, at different levels, of course, based on privilege. But, you know, the trans community, especially trans women of color, are very, you know, low on that sort of list. And so propping us up is really important, especially if we think about the future and the administration and the changes that are being made right now. The largest employer of trans people in the United States is the government and the Army, right? So we're all losing all of these jobs, right? There's 15,000 trans people working in the military. And so, you know, we need access to new opportunities. And that comes down to, like, you know, the littlest things, but big things as well. And I think big things are, I always tell people, like, if you really want to help the trans community, hire us. Give us a job, right? And if you're not a hiring manager and you can't give us a job, help us get education, help us get opportunities, right? And and there's sort of a whole spectrum, but at a minimum, use our pronouns correctly, right? I mean, that's just like the most basic affirming things you can do. But what I use as an example quite a bit, again, when I do my talks, is oftentimes I'll say, look, after this event, people are going to be talking, right? Because I usually tell my whole story. It takes about half an hour. And afterwards, people are buzzing about it. And I guarantee you, people are going to say things like, did you hear when he said this? Right? And so an active ally would correct them. They wouldn't stand by and just let that happen, right? Even though I'm not there. So that's just one very small version of active allyship for the trans experience, but it obviously blows out quite a bit from there. And there's great resources online. One that I always tell people to follow on Facebook is called Ally Academy. And you can just literally follow it, and like every single day you'll get a couple posts. They're just sort of like little things to remind you of how you could become a better ally for different people at different times. And I think the caller, the listener is correct. I like the enthusiasm about that it's Pride Month, but this is a 365, 24/7 thing, right? And I don't mean that in a diminishing way, but it's really unfortunate that it's become a month, because it's not a month, and it's not a day, and it's not one person's job. It's just in everything.
Well, we'll know we are on the path to winning when we don't have to have these days and months and weeks and so forth. I want to thank you for being very specific in your answer there about what people can do, because I want to just give you a little bit of good news, and then Jehan, I want to hear what you have to say in terms of your specific tips for people. But the Harvard Business Review found in a survey that it did that 72% of LGBTQ ally respondents said that they are more likely to accept a job at a company that is supportive of LGBTQ employees than one that is not supportive. So I think from that we might surmise that there are many people who want to be helpful, want to be out, want to do the right thing, and the more you can help us with specifics, the better. So Jehan, can you give what's your specific tip that you would give to people?
Well, I wouldn't think of myself as an ally. I would switch the word ally to advocate. And that's really what it's about. We've got friends, we need advocates. So in the case that Natalie gave, if you heard somebody saying something negative, if you were an advocate for, either trans community, LGBT community, Black community, you name it, immigrant community, you wouldn't sit back and take it. You would advocate on behalf of those people. Very similar to what happened in the civil rights movement. It was not a Black problem, it was everybody's problem, and a lot of white people went to the South and protested arm in arm, and that's what's needed here. And it's not exactly what was said. It's not a month, it's not during the marches, it's not during, a specific period of time. It's a frame of mind. It's either you're an advocate or you're not. And a lot of people aren't comfortable, as we are well observing, with LGBTQ people. And so as an advocate, you have to educate them. The other thing that's the most important is coming out. So we used to come out and tell gay and lesbian people to come out of the closet. And I would urge advocates to come out of the closet. Talk about your gay uncle, your lesbian sister, your father who transitioned. Let this come out. And let's talk about it. This country is built on shame. I mean, I suppose it didn't help that the Puritans were the first that landed here. As an immigrant, I guess I can say that. But it's incredibly, incredibly puritanical. in all these things. I mean, when you look at some other countries and the way they, I mean, let's talk Denmark, let's talk Holland. I mean, I'm not saying there aren't issues there, but the way gays and lesbians and trans people are treated, the way other people, I mean, I would like even to talk about mental illness, not to make the connection in terms of being gay and lesbian and then talking about mental illness, but these are things that, let's not talk about it. You know, let's go back to the 50s. If you have a problem at home, you don't air your laundry. Everybody's quiet, everything. And it's not a way to live. You need to talk about issues. You have to talk about what makes you uncomfortable. You have to confront people who are uncomfortable with things to make it the norm. Look what happens when you don't talk about things. They spiral out of control, and then you wake up. Nobody wanted to talk about the drug problem, and now we have an opioid crisis. I mean, these things have to be met head on, and they need to be aired and discussed openly. There's that word again.
Openly. Reshma, last question from you.
We need more openly advocates.
There you go.
Advocates. All right. We got a new T-shirt here. You need to.
I'm just going to say, active advocate, active ally. I was just having a conversation. You know, every time we all watch the news, I think we're all like, "Oh my gosh, I can't believe that's happening." And I said to my younger brother the other day, he is an ally, but not an active one. And I'm going to tell him about this because I said to him, I said, you can believe all you need to believe, but if you stay quiet at home, the silence of good people is going to kill us.
Silence equals death, if I may quote a great group, ACT UP.
Right, exactly. Wow.
This is time for one more.
Okay, one more quick question.
Okay, actually, I didn't have
a quick question and a quick answer.
Okay, well, I wanted to talk, because this question is so good about, you know, LGBTQ representation in pop culture. And it's more like, you know, GLAAD released the study that showed, you know, 0 transgender characters were in any major motion pictures in 2018. So I just wanted to know, guys, like, does the way pop culture, how they represent LGBTQ persons affect cultures that way?
Of course. I mean, that's the whole basis of GLAAD's existence, is that in order to get, we weren't winning anywhere in the courts because yes, you can pass a law, Brown versus education. Do I have to pick another one? And nobody is there to enforce it unless the mindset changes. And words are powerful and images are powerful. And so our whole advocacy was for accurate representation, and then not just accurate representation, but positive representation. And we believe that this shift in culture, which has happened over the last 30 years, can be directly linked to GLAAD and the work that GLAAD has done and is continuing to do by monitoring the media and making sure that these images are culturally because that's how you change public opinion. It's what people see. If they see a tennis shoe, they run out and buy it. So you don't think if they see images of themselves, number one, people need to see images and models of themselves. And this doesn't just go for the trans LGBT community, it goes for everybody. And that's why there's such an effort to make minorities, if you want to call us minorities, visible.
Yeah.
So,
not that I have a very strong feeling about the subject.
So as we wrap up, I want to make sure people know where they can find you and your companies or whatever you'd like to tell people about how they can find you or the resources you want them to be sure to find. So Jehan?
Okay, great. If you want Lemonette, first of all, you can, it's got no sugar, no canola. It's got so many no's, it's a yes. Lemon-based lemon dressing. You would be helping a gay salad dressing, if you will. And it's at lemonettedressings.com. You can find us also, you can get us on Amazon. We appreciate all the support. GLAAD.com. to help you there. And info@Lemonette Dressings if you need me.
And you personally are on
Twitter?
I know I found you on Twitter
LinkedIn,
and
Instagram, Twitter.
I found you on Instagram. Yes, right. Okay. All right, Natalie, how can people find you? And do you have any particular resources that you want to make sure they find as a result?
I'm very Googleable. If you just put in Natalie Egan, Natalie Jane Egan. My Instagram, which is kind of where that's kind of my jam, is just Natalie J. Egan. But you can find my company at www.translator.company. Remember, it's .company, not .com. And we'd love to hear from you and talk more about the product and how the system kind of works to help facilitate courageous conversations in the workplace and do many of the things that we talked about today. So thank you very much for the opportunity to be here and to create representation for the trans community. I really, really, truly appreciate it on behalf of
Well, I thank you and each of you. And so first of all, we have a lucky winner of the Lemonette, Nora Bucha. And Nora, if you will email us your address at takethelead@taketheleadwomen.com, we will make sure that you get your Lemonette, and you better get it fast, because if not, I'm going to go claim it myself. That's that. Oh gosh, I just can't thank you two enough. I just want to say we got to a lot of questions, but there were a lot of additional questions. And one of the reasons I wanted to make sure that people knew how to reach you on social media is that you may get some other questions from people who would really like to get your point of view on some things. And it's been an enormously helpful conversation to so many. So I guess that's it.
That's it.
Are we done? Are we?
I don't know. I want this to go on.
I want it to go on. Me too. Me too. I'm telling you, this is the best. Okay, so I'm going to ask the one additional question that I love to ask, and I never have time to. But I'm going to take an extra minute. We've already gone over time, so what the heck? I'm going to take an extra minute, which is, you had many challenges in your lives. What's your go-to song or quote that keeps you revved up?
So for me, I don't know if this keeps me revved up as much as it helps me get through the hardest times. But I just always have this sort of, one step in front of the other kind of attitude. And it's really gotten me through the darkest times of my transition and some of the most challenging moments of the last couple of years. And it's really, if I didn't have that to hold on to, I wouldn't be here today. For sure. I mean, there was some really, really dark times. And so I think just that old adage, just put one foot in front of the other, get to the next day. Sometimes I'm like, if I just go to bed, I know I'm going to wake up and it's going to be a new day and it's going to be new things. So that's really given me a lot of strength.
Thank you. Jehan?
Well, just spur the moment, I have to go to one of my favorite men, Shakespeare, "To thine own self be true." No, it's a paraphrase also. It's not exactly how it was written, but I think that the process of being true to yourself is you have to find out who you are first, and then you can be true to yourself. So it's a whole package deal.
Fantastic.
Awesome.
Reshma, thank you so much once again.
Natalie, Jehan, thank you so much. This was such a great conversation.
Thank you so much for having us.
Take care. Thanks for joining Take the Lead Presents Virtual Happy Hour. Be sure to tune in again next month. Remember, it's the second Wednesday of every month at 6:30 p.m. Eastern Time. 1 hour, once a month, to boost your career. Until then, power to you.